Landscape photography is one of the most highly lauded genres of photography. People that are landscapists are oftentimes considered to be among the best professional photographers for many different reasons, right? We're going to be walking through some of the fundamentals today, and I'm really glad that you're coming along with me. My name is Joshua Koerner. I hope that you've been having a great day today. There are a couple fundamentals that if we keep in mind, we're going to be able to take some really stunning images. And I think that it's not going to be too hard to start down that road without even necessarily having to use a tripod, just by being able to use your mind a little bit differently. So when we're thinking about landscape photography, one of the first things we want to be thinking about is composition, right? How can we compose the image so there's a complex foreground, middle ground, and background? And maybe not always complex, but such that they link together and they all provide value to the image. It's got a vibe to me that's very Rococo, if you're in the know on the art world. By layering it, by going wide here, we can layer in some of this stone up front, push that out of focus, give the audience a way to start in the scene, and then kind of move around with these trees and then see the bridge come across here, and then follow the water through, and then understand the further background, which is a really cool way, in my opinion, of showing off a landscape. Landscapes are going to be a lot of composition. A lot of people think that landscape photography is predominantly like, oh, I just got a wide angle lens and boom, there I'm done. I'm shooting on the Tamron 28-75, because that's the only lens that I have for this camera, and I didn't really feel like bringing out the 60 and the 24-105. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that you can do landscape photography with any level of gear, any type of gear. You can do landscape photography with, a 100 to 400. You're just gonna have to do a different type of landscape photography. Hey guys, don't forget to motor drive all over that like button. I wanna get under there. We're going to take a break from your regularly scheduled programming to see if we can't get this butterfly, because butterflies are cool. Oop, just missed out. And he went away. Oh well, we tried. Composition, right? There's the rule of thirds. Everybody says, rules are made to be broken too, so maybe there isn't one good answer for how to do landscape photography. But I think that what we can reasonably say is that a good way is always going to be a way that is interesting to you, right? It's all about you and who your intended audience is. So if you're saying, I'm not interested in XX type of landscapes or skyscapes or whatever, then just don't make those. But the principles are going to be roughly similar regardless. One of the other things that we can learn before we walk into the field is from very popular photography, right? If we say, we're going to put some out of focus elements right in front of the rest of the subject matter, that could be really visually engaging. And so I'm using right here on this bridge some of these steel wires as some of that visual interest to help pass the viewer's eye through the scene. Now, bridges are always going to make really interesting subject matter. I could be biased because I just really like bridges, but rivers are going to do the same, and that's because they kind of force your eye through the space. And that's going to be the other thing that we should be talking about. Eye trace is a key concept from cinema that I'm borrowing, where you layer scenes on top of one another, where the subject matter is in the same position in each frame, so that your audience doesn't have to try very hard to move through that series of scenes with you. You can also have one scene be where the subject moves across the frame, and then that's where you pick up the next time around. So it's a very it's a very fundamental part of cinematography. The way that we use that in landscape photography is through leading lines. So we want leading lines with like this river here to help our audience come into the frame with the foreground and then follow along it into the picture into the deeper picture, and that increases what in the retail world one would call dwell time, where suddenly by spending a little bit more time with the image, by having these leading lines to have the audience explore, you increase the amount of time that someone's going to be spending looking at your image, and that's probably going to make them like it a little bit more. So if I had to say, this is the 4 tricks to landscape photography, the first would be find a subject matter that already has a leading line. Right now we're walking on a trail and this is a leading line. We just came across a bridge, that was a leading line. There is a river through here, that is a leading line. And so when you can kind of bring these elements together, when you already have those in a scene, you can tell a little bit of a better story, a different story, because you have the benefit of having those leading lines built into the frame without you having to artificially put them in there through some other means. If we're going to follow in this vein of tips and tricks for better landscape photography, I think the next one is going to have to be bracketed exposures. Bracketed exposures in some cameras, like my A7 III, is just a mode you can put the camera into, and so it will automatically take brackets of ever how many shots that you set it to at whatever stops that you set it to. So I'm going to find, well, this might be just a great spot to try that out in. I'm going to go ahead and bracket this, and what that does is it captures by ever how many stops below your perfect exposure and then above, and then when you put those together in post, you're going to average out between them and get better exposure in the shadows and better exposure in the highlights. By doing that, that is an HDR image. Nothing wrong with HDR at all. And when you're doing it manually like that, that's great. Just don't push it too far, right? The problem with HDR is not HDR, it's when people take it a bit too far. Using stacked images like that, using different exposures to help your image gain depth and complexity and exposure is going to help you make images that are going to be more compelling, because there aren't going to be any elements that are completely overexposed. There aren't going to be elements that are completely underexposed, and so it's going to allow your audience to connect with that image a little bit better. And landscape photography or architectural photography is really cool when you have really cool architecture. It's not as interesting, of course, when you don't. Now, the way to do that, wow, climbing this hill is a lot harder than I thought it'd be. Mulch. Architectural photography is another place where it's really cool to do things like bracket exposure and use leading lines, use some of those rule of thirds learnings to help get a little bit of a better compositional image. What it will end up doing is allow you to make pictures that are more universally compelling when you say, I'm going to help an audience's eye come through the frame. I'm going to provide leading lines. I'm going to maybe do the overly popular thing of putting out of focus elements in front of the subject matter. And you're going to be able to make some really cool images without having to know all the things, without needing a really high-end tripod, without doing some wacky stuff, right? But as you're thinking about how to do it and what you want to do, you don't have to think, I can't do that because of anything. You can do it, and you should do it because it's cool. I hope you've learned a lot from this little video on landscape photography, on the landscape fundamentals. I really appreciate your time and your attention with me. If you're interested in what I use to make this video, check out the affiliate links in the description, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much. I'm Joshua Koerner, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.